Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and let me tell you about my guest. So I'm going to frame it. Coming up very soon is the 60th anniversary of the iconic Cambridge debate between James Baldwin and William F. Buckley Jr., where they argued, is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro? Good question then, good question now. Some of you might remember when this conversation actually happened. So today we have with us a talented author, actress, and librettist, Karen Chilton, who has created an opera called The Tongue and the Lash, which tells a story of what conversations might have taken place between Baldwin and Buckley after that historic debate. And this is coming up on February 18th in New York City. Before we learn more about this unique opera, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Karen Chilton. She is legitimately what we call a Renaissance woman. She's won a bunch of awards for her narration, acting, and playwriting talents. Her dynamic skill set has afforded her the opportunity to contribute to so many projects, honoring iconic figures such as Jacob Lawrence, Scott Joplin, Gloria Lynn, for whom she co-authored her memoir, W.E.B. Du Bois, and so many more. And she is also the author of the first ever written biography of the jazz pianist, singer, and activist Hazel Scott. Karen's incredible career is reflective of her musical training and background, and she's here today to tell us more about her love for the arts and what role opera plays in that. Please join me in welcoming Karen Chilton.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you so much.
Oh, and this is so exciting. James Baldwin, the quintessential Renaissance man, right?
Right, right.
He did so much. I mean, you could study him forever and just touch on the tip of things because he was a prolific creator.
He was.
Can you tell us about this conversation? And I think this is so timely, Karen, given what's going on in our world, the politics of our world, this pushback against people who look like us.
Right,
Like the suddenly it's a bad word, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
right,
And so I feel like you could not have picked a better time.
right.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this, Harriet, is my collaborative partner and I, the brilliant composer, conductor, Damian Sneed, we wrote this during COVID. And
Mm,
it's so when I started thinking of the timeline and I thought about how James Baldwin starts off the debate where he says, I feel like a kind of Jeremiah, this prophet that's trying to warn the people if we don't do better, there is an impending doom. But what's interesting is we started this in 2020. And Opera Theater of St. Louis came to Damien and said, we want you to participate in our festival and write a chamber opera. Who do you want to work with? He said, you need to call Karen Chilton. They called me and said, we're thinking of doing something around the Baldwin Buckley debate. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. I know that debate. I'm a Baldwinite. I have every book, every play, every essay, all of it. I mean, he is
fantastic.
my literary hero. And I remember the artistic director said, but what do you want to do? Because the debate is so it is so historic, and then everything that he says in it is so prophetic. And I said, it doesn't give me much to do if I try to dramatize what Baldwin said. I said, why don't we think about what's the conversation after the cameras are off, after the crowd is left. So that becomes the conceit of this new libretto, of this new story, because Baldwin and Buckley at that time had just met. They knew of each other, of course, and Buckley used to refer to Baldwin actually as the eloquent menace. So he was very much aware of his prowess. But this meeting at Cambridge University in the debating hall, 1965, on February 18th, was the first time they came face to face. And they came face to face like two pugilists, in a boxing ring. And they went at it. And when you think of the time period and the backdrop of the civil rights movement is happening while they're up here debating about race in America. And so it was such a ripe opportunity as a dramatist, but it was also really frightening because after I said yes, I said, oh my God, I have to put words in James Baldwin's mouth. like, So
There you
how do
go.
I do
That's
that?
scary.
Right.
Wait, but I love that this man was brilliant. He knew it, he lived it, and he was humble.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it has so much to do with him being a child minister, a child preacher, and
Mhm.
really, really having those religious roots, that I think the humility came from his deep and abiding faith in God.
That
Like
makes sense.
this is not me, this is coming through me.
Yes.
And to have the faith and the courage, because when you think of such a small, diminutive man with this
Yes.
big, booming baritone that'll scare the hell out of anybody, and he's standing in Cambridge Union, when you see the debate, there's something about him that seems all powerful and also vulnerable at the
Yes.
same time. So there's all of these contradictions, but that's what made writing the opera so much fun. I
I
looked at the
bet.
blank page for a long time. I mean, I looked at that page like, okay, what am I
What's
writing?
going on
What's
here?
happening? And I looked at the page and I thought, I knew I wanted to start it with an aria. And I said,
Mm.
if I can just get this aria out of my body, then I know the rest will just take off. And that's what happened.
So tell us your background that you even know. So, okay, you're one of your titles is librettist. You wrote a libretto for this opera.
Mhm.
I'm going to guess that there are people who are tuned in who don't know what a libretto is, who may not know what an aria is, because a lot of people don't know opera.
Right.
And so define those terms for us, please. And how in the world did you come to do this?
I'll start this by saying a lot of librettists are also playwrights. So that's sort of the structure of a libretto is very similar to the dramatic structure of a play. The difference, and when I talk to people about it, the easiest way for me to describe it is just think music and lyrics. Music and lyrics. So in
Mhm.
opera, everything is sung. So whatever I'm writing, it will be sung by the singers. The only difference is it's not like the lyrics of say your favorite album, but it's the lyrics of a play, because there is a story. There is
Story.
an arc, there's a protagonist, there's an antagonist, there's a real story, a dramatic structure that undergirds the whole thing, except it's all sung. So as a librettist, because I'm a playwright, so moving in.
You would consider yourself a playwright first.
Oh yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I had written many, many plays. And so I came to this because of Damien saying, I really want to work with you. I want to collaborate with you. But I also have a background in music. I studied classical piano from the age of 6 until I quit. It was, it was one of those, you
When
know,
did you quit? How old were you when you quit?
I quit when I went away to college, when I went to undergrad, because and my grandmother was very disappointed.
I bet.
I said, I can't take, because the crazy thing was, I had been in the arts all my life. I go to undergrad and major in economics because I'm listening to people saying, you got to major in something, you can get a job, all this stuff, that we hear.
That is a symphony that plays in a lot of families.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, but I've been to piano lessons every day of my life. I go to the ballet, I go to the opera. I mean, these are the things that I truly loved as a kid. And then I go to school and I'm at the College of Business and I'm sitting there like, why am I in here?
Hmm.
But, I go to college and I told my grandmother, I said, I can't keep playing because it's too much. Like the classes are too much, the load, the workload of being in college and trying to adjust. I can't keep playing the piano and going to lessons. And she said, well, okay. And it was that voice that is like, just keep living, because I know something that you don't know. And the interesting thing is, I remember I took classes in ballet and poetry and classes that I knew would feed the soul, because that's who I was.
While you were getting your economics degree.
While I'm doing all this, statistics and macroeconomic and all this stuff, I would sneak off in the night and take a ballet class or take a piano class or music theory class, because that's what kept me sane. And I remember I took a poetry class, and the way that the professor constructed the class was every time you came in, he had a little tray, and you had to put a poem in the tray, and you put your poem down. You never put your name on it. So you drop your poem off, and every day, in class, he would write the poem. He would take it, write it on the board, big as life, and we would deconstruct it. So the day that I turned in my poem, he's writing it. I'm like, oh God. And I'm sinking. I'm like, oh God, it's my turn. And so he starts writing my poem. He writes the whole thing. He stops. He turns around and he looks at the class and says, who is the musician?
Ooh.
And I'm like, what is he talking about? He goes, who is the musician? And nobody says a word because I'm terrified. He said, whoever wrote this is a musician. Who's the musician? And I was like, well, I studied piano. He's like, and he said to me, and I'll never forget it, the music is in the words.
Mm.
So I run back to my dorm room, and I call my grandmother. I'm like, my professor said the music is in the words. The music is in the words, because I felt so guilty for giving a piano.
Mm.
And so, one of my favorite quotes is by Edward Albee, who said, sometimes you have to go a long distance out of the way to come back a short distance correctly. And she knew something I didn't. When I told her I stopped piano, she said, okay. And now here I am.
How brilliant, Karen, that you were able to tell her.
Yeah.
They don't always live long enough for us to be able to offer our gratitude, completely.
It's true. And so to answer your question in this really long way, it was a natural progression for me to come from, because my MFA is in dramatic writing, which makes sense. So,
you course corrected there too. Although I bet the finance degree has been helpful to you.
I should hope. I think sometimes, yes, sometimes I'm like, oh, I know better than this. But
well, what we know is that every experience is something that we can learn from. That for certain is true. But you ended up going to the Tisch School at NYU, right?
Right. For your MFA, yeah.
For your MFA. So you call yourself Playwright first. When did you know that was going to be it? So you figured out in that class that, the music is in the words.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you go from that, which is still theoretical?
Right.
To actual?
When I graduated I went to Bradley University. I grew up in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So I went to Bradley University. When I graduated, I knew that degree held nothing for me. I was grateful to my parents because there's 4 of us and there were 3 of us in college at the same time. Ooh. So I was grateful. I was a humble kid. I wasn't, but I knew, looking at the degree, it was kind of like, this is yours. Y'all paid for it. I'm grateful. I made it through. I got good grades. I did everything right. But guess what? I'm going to work at the Goodman Theater. And my mother was like, you going to say what? I mean, it was, and my father just stopped talking. He was just like, I said, well, no, I really want to work in the theater. It's just that crazy thing that knocks inside of you that says, this is where you belong. You don't belong over here. Mm-hmm. And I had the courage at least to listen to it. And they said, at the Goodman Theater doing what? I said, well, I'm going to work in the box office because, there's a job. And then it was just like, okay, we can't even talk to you right now. Like we can't, we're just done talking. It wasn't pleasant. So
you were going to work in the box office after we spent all this money for you for 4 years to go to college.
At a private university. We didn't sit. So I go to the Goodman Theater. I remember the pay was $4.40 an hour. Ooh. And and my reason was I had this strong urging to be near the theater. I needed to smell it. I needed to hear it. I didn't care if I was in a box office. I needed to see actors coming and going. I needed to be able to stay after work and go see a play or listen to a director's talk back because that's where I felt at home. And that's the only way I can describe it. And so by the time I got to my late 20s, I broke the other bombshell. I said, well, guess what? I'm going to New York.
Okay, wait, let me let folks set the stage. You are tuned into Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. And I didn't even realize what time it was. I am so connected to your story. We are talking to Karen Chilton. This is such a privilege to talk to you. Thank you for being here, Karen.
Thank you so much. So I
So,
come to
yeah, so what happened next?
So I come to New York. I had started doing some freelance writing, like with some magazines and stuff. And so there was, I don't know, you probably do remember this. I'm going back some ways. There used to be a Caribbean magazine called Class
Uh,
magazine. And I had met the publisher in Chicago. I said, "Oh, I'm a freelance writer, just hustling, talking, faking it till I make it." And he said, "Well, write a story for me on the Cotton Club," because there was a club in Chicago at the time called the Cotton Club. And I knew the owner's daughter, and I was like, "Oh no, I'll write a fabulous piece." I give him this piece. He goes, "This is really good. We're going to publish this." He said, "Where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm in Chicago now." He's like, "You should come to New York." So I build up this thing to my parents bigger than it actually was. And I say, "Oh, I just got offered this job to be a writer at Class Magazine. I'm going to do the thing." And they were like, "Okay, this is okay." Well, of course, I get to New York. This man can't halfway pay me. God rest his soul. He was like, "I'll publish you, but I can't halfway pay you." So I started doing music criticism. I started doing, he would send me to like a Seal concert or a Sade concert and say, "Okay, write a review." So I started doing that, but the money, of course, couldn't pay the rent. So I did everything but drive a cab because the dream was I'm coming to New York to write for the theater and as an actor to be in the theater. That is the dream. And if
and
I
so tell me this, where, like, logistics, where did you live? How did you take care of yourself, the basics?
I lived, well, believe it or not, I lived in Murray Hill when
Wow.
I the gods were with me.
They were with you, the
They were
angels
with me.
present.
Just
Okay.
to this day, I'm just like, I don't know how all this happened. I remember my rent was $750, which was daunting at that time. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, $750 in 1992. And I lived down in Murray Hill. I found a little bitty cute little studio. I had saved up every penny I had, and I was just paying that rent. So I worked on Wall Street answering phones from 7 a.m. to about 10. I left there, and then I would go to the magazine from 10 to about 3 and edit and write stories and all of that. And I felt like, oh, I'm a writer. Then I
Yeah.
would leave there, run home, eat, gobble down some food. And then I went to Henry Bendel's and I worked in the hat department until 9
Bendel's used
o'clock
to
at
be
night.
the place. It used to be the place. And a lot of people came through Bendel's. I'm sure you
Right.
met some
Yeah.
interesting, influential people during that time. But this is what it takes. And so, Karen, my show is called Dreamleapers.
Mhm.
The purpose of it is so that there's the broadcast, and I also teach people how to access and activate their dreams.
Mm.
And this broadcast, I bring people on like you who are doing it so people can see it is possible. It is absolutely possible. You have to be willing to work, you
Yeah.
have to be creative. The
Yeah.
path usually is not laid out for you.
No.
You have to make your own path, and there are lots of twists and turns in the path. But if you want it badly enough and
Yeah.
you work hard enough, it can happen.
And I think part of that is not having a preconceived idea of how it's all supposed to play out. Because we just don't know. It's what my grandmother would say, well, just keep living. You'll see. Because the way that I got my first book deal was completely unplanned. I never came to write books. I never
Mhm.
planned to write books. I said, I'm going to this theater, I'm going to star in the theater, and I'm going to write plays. I don't know what nobody else is talking about. So, and when I left Ben, I did that whole journey, that 3-job thing for about a year, kept freelancing, but then I ended up working at BMG Records,
Okay.
really as a temp. It was just a temp job.
Mhm.
But I met that was back in the day of the Whitney Houston and just all of those 90s artists that were coming through there. So I worked there as a temp, and I'm writing my plays because I had this really cool boss. He said, he was like, "Write your plays. I don't care because I don't have that much work for you, but you always look busy," because I'm in there just writing plays
Right.
on the job. But I got so tired of it, and I was getting impatient, which I think happens when that dream is
Sure.
real. And I'm like, and I remember the day I went in the ladies' room because everybody there had gotten on my nerves. And I said, "Lord, if you will just get me out of here and give me an opportunity, I will work as hard as any artist has ever worked." That night, I went to the old Barnes and Noble that used to be in Chelsea down on 22nd.
Mhm.
And I had a friend that we used to meet there and just go get coffee and hang out. I'm walking around, literally, this, I do not make this up. I'm walking through the bookstore. This little woman with a Southern Georgian accent comes up to me and says, "Excuse me, do you know any books on jazz written by women?" And I said, "No." I said, "I'm a big jazz fan." I said, "But you know, those books are always written by men." I said, "Usually it's European men." I said, "You know, we don't," I said, "I don't know, but you know, the music department's over there." And I'm like pointing her away from me.
Mhm.
And she goes, "Well, you just look like you would know." And I said, "Well, miss," I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "But I don't work here. And the jazz books are over there." And she said, "Well, I'm going to give you my card." She said, "Do you know the singer Gloria Lynn?" I said, "Yeah, I know Gloria Lynn." I said, "My father's a big jazz fan. He loves Gloria." I said, "I know her records." She said, "Well, I'm her publicist. Can I give you my card? And if you think of anybody, you'll call and tell me." So I put the card in my jeans pocket and I keep going. I said, "I don't know why that lady kept following," because she was literally following me. And my friend said, "Well, why didn't you tell her you're a writer?" I said, "I'm a playwright. I don't write books. You know, I'm a playwright." And he said, "Okay." The next day, I go to that same temp job, and everybody's getting on my nerves even more. So, and I have on the same jeans. And I literally, because I always tell people when it comes to dreams, you got to pay attention and you got to listen.
Absolutely.
I pulled the card. I said, "You know what? I'm going to call this woman because I've been writing music criticism for like 5 years now. I have all of these writing samples." I call her. The minute I call her, she goes, "Hi, Karen. I was waiting for your call."
Yes.
I'm just like, "Say what now?" She said, "I've been waiting for
I'm
your
getting
call."
chills listening to this. This
It
is
was
so good.
crazy. It was pure crazy. And I had asked the guy I worked for, I said, "Can I use your office? I got to make a personal call." He said, "Use the office, close the door, go ahead." So I'm nervous. I'm calling her. She says, "This is what you do. This is the agent, the literary agent. This is who you contact. Send her all your stuff. They're looking for a writer to write Gloria's book." I said, "Okay." I send all my stuff off. They promptly reject me because they say, "You have no track record as a writer and we really need a seasoned author, blah, 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 blah." I said, "Okay, this is what I did." And I can't even believe I did this, but it was what I was moved to do. I wrote the literary agent a thank you note. And I said, "Thank you so much for taking the time to review my materials. If in your search you don't find who you're looking for, call me back."
Mm.
About not quite a year later, they called me back and they said, "Come to this meeting. We want you to meet Gloria. We want to tell you about the project." Gloria Lynn took one look at me. She said, "I want this girl to write my book."
Mm.
And the book is here. It's
That is so beautiful.
walking through a Barnes and Noble.
This is how it happens, though. You know, when you are open to grace, there it
Mhm,
is.
mhm.
And when you have, I also think when you have a sense of the direction that you're headed in, you may not know the exact thing, but having some clarity around where your passions lie, you know, what you care about, and your energy articulates it, but also sometimes you have to say it out loud. In that case, you were all set up. You were working at the record company. You had your
Right.
father and that whole background, and that woman saw it. She sensed it.
Saw it. Yep. She
That's powerful.
followed me through the whole place. And here's the real, this is the real spine tingling moment. When I finally went to Gloria's house and we used to sit around her kitchen table, it was the best, that was the funniest woman I had ever met in my life. She was a hoot. And we became really, really close after the book. And I would go to her kitchen. She would cook me lunch. We would sit there and she would just talk. I would record everything. And she said, "The day that Dale met you at that bookstore," I said, "Yeah." She said she called me that night and said, "I found your writer."
Mm.
She knew something I didn't even know. She called Gloria and said, "I found her." And she said, "Well, who is she?" What? She's like, "She gonna call me."
And she had to be patient because in the process of making books, which I'm sure you know well now, you don't have as much authority as you think. Even Gloria Lynn
Right,
over who could write her book. So
right.
everybody had to wait and and have faith and be prepared, and all of
Yeah,
those things rarely happen exactly when you want them to.
it's
Patience
true.
is the biggest lesson.
It's true.
Uh,
And the thing is, you got to be ready, because when the editor and everybody, I'm surrounded by all these people at St. Martin's Press. They're like, "Well, why do you think that you're the one?" I said, everything in my life has prepared me for this moment.
mm,
I've studied music. I'm a writer. I'm a dramatist. I know this. I know this woman. I'm a Black woman. I understand her story, because the writer that they had her with previously, because she had fired a writer and it was a white
mm.
man. And she said, "I don't feel comfortable telling this white man my story." And I said, this just makes sense. And it did. It ended up being a wonderful book that she loved. I mean, the critics loved it and we got great reviews. But my only concern was, do you love this? Because this is your life on the page. And that was the
And
honor.
in the process of listening and then framing her story for her,
Mhm.
talk about that, because that's an interesting, delicate dance to, making sure you have her voice, but also structuring it so that you take the reader into the experience. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, you know what I decided after I sat with her and I hung out with her, we went to some concerts, like we really spent some time together. I was listening, and this is the thing, it was my playwright's ear. It was
Mm.
my ear that I have for character that was listening to her. And I noticed, her cadence, her phraseology, the way that she referred to things, her sense of humor. And I decided from the start, I want this book to feel and sound like her. This
Mhm.
is not about me, how prolific I am as a writer and how I can turn a phrase
Right.
and what big words I need. I said, I want this to feel like jazz. I want this to be soulful. I want it to feel like Harlem. She's born and raised in Harlem. And I want it to sound like her. And so that was how I pursued it. Of course, I put the structure around it. It was cradle to the grave. So I built the arc of,
Right.
the life and the career and all of that. But the tone of it and the pitch of it, I said, this has to be Gloria. And
Mhm.
whenever one of her friends would come to a book signing and somebody would say, "Oh my God, this sounds just like Gloria," I was like,
Oh,
hey, I
that's
did
the greatest gift ever.
it.
You did your
Yeah.
job. You did your job. Hey, everybody. This is Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. We are talking with Karen Chilton. She is a playwright, an author, a librettist, a voiceover artist, right? I mean, you've
Yeah.
done a lot of things with your career, and it's just wonderful to listen to you tell your stories. And so I want to ask you about the plays, because you said you started there.
Hmm.
In that process, because we can create things. How soon after you started creating plays did you have them performed? And what are you most proud of that you've had performed?
Well, I'll be honest. It's interesting because Damien and I are working on. I mean, we premiered The Tongue and the Lash at Opera Theater of St. Louis in 2021. So we're really excited to bring it to New York and have the New York premiere directed by the opera legend Denise Graves. Um, and when Denise asked me about the work, I remember saying to her, out of everything I've written, I think this is my most cherished work.
Oh,
It's the shortest, it's the smallest piece. I mean, because I've written biographies and that's
right.
massive. I mean, the Hazel Scott book took me 7 years,
Mm.
just the journey of trying to get a publisher because, I was told craziness like nobody buys books on Black women, nobody buys books on jazz, and ain't nobody gonna buy a book on a Black woman in jazz. So that was a journey all by itself. But it's this little libretto. I mean, I've had short plays done in festivals and some of my full length stuff I've had done regionally. I'm working on a new piece now. And whenever I have actors standing up and saying my words, it's a thrill because I'm an actor. So
Yeah.
I'm having this really symbiotic moment with them. However, nothing prepared me, absolutely nothing prepared me for the moment in St. Louis. I still get chills in 2021 in the hot Missouri sun as the sun was setting when I heard the overture to the opera. And those two singers came out on that stage and they started to sing my words. Tears, just waterworks. I had never had a more fulfilling artistic experience in my life. That was it.
That's powerful. And so it debuted in Chicago, where you're from, is
It debuted at Opera Theater of St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Mhm.
And so when did it debut? How long ago?
That was 2021.
2020. So that was that during the pandemic?
It was during the pandemic.
And you were able to do a public performance?
It was insane because Opera Theater of St. Louis was one of the only opera houses that kept running. And what they did is they built a stage outdoors. And they said, we're not canceling our season. We're going to build this outdoor stage. Everybody will come outside. They had paramedics lined up. They had water. They had all masks. They had all this stuff.
That's so exciting.
Isn't that why? And for anybody that may have seen Terrence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones, it originated at Opera Theater of St. Louis. So they were the brave ones. They were the ones that said, you guys go ahead and write this and we're going to do it. And even in writing it in 2020, when me and Damien started to collaborate, everybody was so down and we had never experienced anything like that. And I thought, I don't even know if I feel creative right now. What's going to come out of me in this moment? And I think that's why The Tongue and the Lash is so special to me, because it came at a moment that I didn't think anything could come out.
Right. I'm always fascinated by the stories that people share about what they did during the pandemic. How did you spend your time? Mm-hmm. And there's a range of things. I mean, a whole lot of people wasted their time, but we won't focus on that. The people who really used it and honored it and created something meaningful. And this is obviously what you did with your partner on this. And first of all, the collab. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that, because that's an interesting relationship to be in collaborative relationship with two creative people.
Right. Yeah.
What was the process like for working with Damien?
Well, because it was COVID, we couldn't meet. We couldn't talk in person. We were always either on FaceTime or Zoom or something. And what we decided, honestly, was to trust each other. It was really, let me go into the woodshed. I'm going to come up with this story. I hope you like it. If you don't, there's more where that came from. So we can toss it, start over. But let me work on this. Let me put the mound of clay on the pedestal and start working. And he said, no, go do your thing. He was like, I don't want to interfere. I don't want to interrupt you. I don't want to, just do your thing. And even when I started writing it and it all came out of me, I said, oh my God. I said, this is something. Sometimes you write things, you go, oh, this needs a little work. This needs a little tweak. This needs help. This needs time. We didn't have time. And that was the other thing. They put us on this very, very short, tight deadline. And now looking back, I realized that tight deadline was the best thing that happened to us, because we didn't have a chance to overthink it. It was just let it out, let it be. It was a very organic experience. And even when I named the libretto, the opera, The Tongue and the Lash, I was saying, I hope he likes this. I hope this is okay. But it makes sense for what this is. So I literally handed it over to him. I left him alone. He said, let me go and do my thing musically. He starts playing things. He's here, because he's a genius. So he's hearing things in his head. He's like, you'll be talking. He was like, hold on. He'll grab his phone. He's like, okay, that phrase came to me. And you're like, okay, do your thing. So I left him alone. We came back together, and I will never forget. And I'll just never stop being grateful to him for this moment, because this was another special moment. I got a text message at 3:00 in the morning, a few weeks later. And he said, the minute you wake up, call me. So I roll over, I see this, and I'm like, oh my God, he's finished it. He's finished it. And so it feels like, the kid at Christmas. So I hurry up, I get myself together. And then I called him, and he said, just hold on. And he put the phone down and he starts on his keyboard. Damien played the entire opera and sang the entire opera to me over the phone.
Oh,
And I'm a puddle. I mean, at this point, and I knew, I said, Damien, this has come through us. We know this is not from us, this is through us.
mhm.
And this is special. And then we never touched it again. We
Mm.
didn't go into, oh, let's fix, let's do, da, 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 because it came complete. He trusted me, I trusted him. We went to St. Louis. And I can't even tell you the response. It was ovations every night. It was this emotional response, which this is an opera about race, where two men are talking about race.
Yes.
And in this really fraught moment that we're in now, it's amazing to me that here we are in New York at Town Hall to do this piece again at, it's like Baldwin. I just think of him as a prophet. I'm like, well, here we are. He was prescient in what he knew. We're gonna have to deal with this. And
Mhm.
so here we are again with the tongue and the lash. And it's another really special moment. And it'll be interesting to me what people feel in New York, because we were in a red state, Missouri. when
Yes, you were.
And I'm like, we might need to park the car a little closer to the exit because we might have to bust up out of here. And I'm not casting aspersion. I'm just saying America is America. So we all know where we are. And
And tensions are high.
yeah,
Right now, tensions are high. I was talking about this this morning, that it's like the flame can ignite in a second.
yeah,
Even people who normally you would have positive discourse with, any old thing can set you off because things are hostile right
right.
now.
Yep.
And Baldwin was able to creatively and incisively examine what was going on in our world,
Mm-hmm.
very strongly, but also in ways that people were able to hear him,
Yeah.
which a lot of people aren't hearing anything right now.
No.
They're really not. So now he performed this for you, the whole thing over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't told us yet, but I know that this libretto is short.
It's a
Tell
short.
us about that, the how long it is and why.
Initially, when Opera Theater of St. Louis came to us, they wanted the opera to be a chamber opera, a short opera that was part of a festival. So, what they do every summer is they do three operas in one night, and they're all about 20 to 30 minutes, so that it's like an hour-long evening where you get to see three different operas. So, our
Okay.
opera was one of three, and ours was the last on the evening. And I just would never forget that experience, because every single night people wanted to come up, they wanted to talk. We couldn't leave. We would stand outside for hours. We could not leave. Everybody wanted to talk. They wanted to say something. They wanted to express something, because this thing, I always say that art should be provocative. I'm not trying to solve the problem, but I can present the problem, and then maybe
Mhm.
we can all talk about it. And that's what was happening in St. Louis every night of that opera. And I remember one woman, bless her heart, this woman, she was an older white woman, and she came up to us, and her friend had her arm around her. She said, "Oh, she wants to talk to you about the opera." And we were like, "Sure." We stood out there. When she got in front of us, all this woman could do was cry.
Mm.
She couldn't speak. She was completely overcome. She was shaking. She was crying. She couldn't get a word out. And I
Mm.
just looked at her and I said, I get it.
Mhm.
We get it. And her friend literally had to just carry her off. She was completely overcome. Because the idea that we present in the opera is, with Baldwin as the protagonist, he's not trying to clunk anybody over the head with, you've got to think like me, you've got to believe like I believe. He's literally presenting, look at the terrain. This is not sustainable. How do
Mm.
we continue going like this? Is this what you want? American carnage, where one race is left to feel less than the other? Are you going to continue with your ideas of superiority and keep your foot on the neck of people who are genuinely here just trying to live? trying to make a way for their wives, their children, their grandchildren. Who are you to say? There's a line in the opera in the libretto that says, "Who made you the arbiter of human value?"
Mm.
How do you get to decide who has value and who doesn't? I really think Baldwin he was the gadfly. It was, I'm presenting this. I don't have the answer, but I know that you're not the answer. And this attitude is not going to get us nowhere. So that's, that's what the tongue and the lash is all about. And I love the idea that people wanted to talk. I always say, if you have
Excellent.
a play and people come out of the theater talking about it and not saying, "Oh, what you want to eat? You want Chinese? You want Italian?" Then you've done something.
You're right. And so do you build in time, like for this New York performance? Is there time after for people to talk?
They actually, Town Hall is going to do a panel discussion.
Oh, good.
So the motion of the debate in 1965 was, is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro? So the panel discussion is going to be moderated by the esteemed author Edwidge Danticat. It's a fabulous panel that they've assembled. Dr. Brenda Green is on the panel from Medgar Evers College. Dr. I'm gonna get everybody's name right. Dr. Frank Roberts, who's a young, prolific professor at Amherst who does a lot of work with the LGBTQ community. He's on the panel. Nicholas Bucala, I think I'm saying his name right, either Bucola or Bucala. He wrote the book about the debate called "The Fire Is Upon Us." He's on the panel. So the
Wonderful.
panel discussion is not going to be about the debate. It's going to be about what is the American dream 60 years later. So the first hour, the first hour will be the opera. The second hour will be the panel. But our opera is about a half hour, only because that was the restriction when we did it at OTSL. And we played with the idea of, oh, can we stretch this out? Can we add? Can we? And every time we go in, it's like,
it didn't want to be bigger.
No,
it was fully baked.
It was fully baked.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Hey guys, this is Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. We are learning today, which I just love so much. We're talking with Karen Chilton. She is an author, an actor, a playwright, a librettist. And on February 18th, the libretto honoring this incredible conversation between James Baldwin and William F. Buckley Jr. is going to be performed. It is called The Tongue and the Lash at Town Hall in New York City. The fact that that rich discussion is happening afterward, I think is so important, especially since you said people need to talk. That there will be such an uplifted, enlightened conversation led by the brilliant Edwidge Danticat. And I'm sure after there will still be this feast of conversation, which is hopefully can lead people towards some kind of strengthening of spirit and soul. Because that's what we need right now. We need to be stronger. Did you have an intention in creating this for what action you might want people to take after? Or because a lot of times creative people, you're just making it and then the audience does what they want with it. What did you have an intention that was more than that?
Not really. I think it was, the conceit of the piece is that this is a post-debate conversation, because I was just curious for these two men who knew each other's reputations but who had never met, and then they meet like this. It's like two boxers meeting in the ring. What would that conversation be? So that excited me as an artist. But in terms of the audience, I really just wanted to provoke, like, let's provoke more conversation around race, around because there's a moment in the opera where James Baldwin says, look ahead. And it's sort of a prophetic moment. And I think that would be the thing that I would want people to take away. Where are we now? How did we get here? And where do we go from here?
And I think learning about James Baldwin's life can be helpful, because right now there are a lot of people who feel helpless, who feel like they don't have any power, so I can't do anything. Should we just give up now?
Mhm.
They're trying to erase us off the planet. And of course, that is not what we can do, nor should we do that. But
Mhm.
learning about someone who is so strong,
Yeah.
creative, and willing to stand up and say,
Yeah. And think about the time period with people like him and Hazel Scott and Paul Robeson and Harry Belafonte. I mean, we could go on and on and on.
yes,
They spoke out at a time when they literally could be killed. They could be
that's
just be killed. They could have been assassinated. So the bravery and the courage, and that's what I lean on is, the example that all of these ancestors left behind. And I'm like, if
yes.
they weren't afraid, if they had the courage, then who are we to not be brave?
Amen to that. Karen Chilton, thank you for creating this work. I really hope that a lot of people go to see it on February 18th, The Tongue and the Lash. It's inspiring to learn how you were inspired by James Baldwin, and thank you for creating something that you could share with all of us.
Thank you so much, Harriette.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Remember, Karen Chilton, The Tongue and the Lash, at Town Hall in New York City on February 18th. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.